Okay, so we're going to start back. So this is now going into our session 5, which is looking at English literature model answers. So we're just going to look at an idea of how the mark schemes work and how they grade you. So just so you know, what normally happens in the mark scheme is the examiner is given a table of assessment objectives, like what you have to do to achieve that particular band. If you have not achieved everything in that band, you cannot get up to the next band. So even if you have, for example, let's say you satisfy everything that's in a grade 4, right? Everything is in there, it's all great. So that puts you into grade 5. But let's say you're missing one thing from grade 5, but then you go into grade 6 and you've got everything in grade 6 and everything in grade 7 and everything in grade 8. If you've missed that thing in that grade, you can't get further up. So you have to make sure that you are definitely achieving all those lower grade basic things to make sure that you're getting into those upper level answers and those upper level grades. That's nothing to worry about, because it doesn't mean it's not impossible. It doesn't mean you have to be perfection. It makes it sound like that, but we're going to go through the mark scheme so you can see. But before we do, I'm just going to have a look with you at a model answer for Jekyll and Hyde. So let's do a share screen. Okay, and this has some comments from the examiner along with it. So let me move myself out of the way. Okay, so the question is, read from chapter 10, Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. Hence it came about, to my knowledge does not pass beyond that point, pages 57 to 8. In this extract, Jekyll explains how he came to see a vision in himself between his respectable public life, a division in himself between his respectable public life and the behaviour he was ashamed of. Starting with this extract, explore how Stevenson presents the idea of the double in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Write about how Stevenson presents the idea of the double in his extract and how Stevenson presents the idea of the double in the novel as a whole. So, as you heard, even I trip up when I'm reading things. So you want to make sure that you read things a couple of times to make sure you've got the right idea. And also, very interesting here, the idea of the double implies that there is duality, that there is a dual, rather than the idea of double, which was what I read initially. And if I'd have taken that and not gone and corrected myself, the idea of double could be much more general. So really make sure you read the question. Every single word has been selected for a reason. Obviously, the first thing we want to do is circle the key words or phrases so we know what we're doing. So in this extract, Jekyll, so you don't need to do anything from here. We gather that's part of it. But he says, Jekyll explains how he came to see a division in himself between his respectable public life and the behaviour he was ashamed of. Okay, so the keywords there, I would say, although this is our question and the keywords here are really important, we've got explore. So explore, Stevenson presents the double, and we know it's in that book. And obviously, remember it being in this extract, we do the plan just as we did before, where you make your point across the top. So you've got PEE 1, 2, 3. You make your point. You say how you would answer the question in one sentence with your one idea. Then you're going to put the evidence in the extract. And then you're going to put in the third column the evidence in the rest of the play of the same idea, along with why the author did it and what the effect on the reader or audience is. Okay. And in this case, really, I would say, really pick up on respectable public life versus behavior he was ashamed of, because there might be behavior that he's done that was bad that he's not ashamed of. So let's be really clear, pick out the things where there are ideas of him being absolutely firmly ashamed of it. Don't presume all of his bad behavior was shameful, even though we know it is in society. it's asking how Jekyll explains how he came to see a division in himself. It's about his opinion. So this is a level 7 answer. So we're going to have a read through, and these are the examiner's notes here. So the concept of the double is central to the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There are several types of duality. The most important is the mix of good and evil in human nature. Other types of duality include appearance and reality, and science and the supernatural. This passage focuses most on the duality of good and ill. I think they mean evil. They haven't said ill, have they? No, they said evil. Good and ill in Jekyll's personality, but they've used that as a quote. So, but their clear definition of scope links to the wider book. So they've already said, yes, it's in this extract, and there's stuff in the rest of the book. Jekyll's statement is an important part of the novella, as it is the first time we find out the whole story and see events from Jekyll's point of view. This places the passage in context and comments on the structure. So that's basically saying that the student that has written this paper knows where the extract that they've been given in the exam as the question, they know where that comes within the play. In this passage, Jekyll states one of the main themes of the book, those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. This second aspect of a person is sometimes called their alter ego, the aspect which Jekyll names Hyde. So can you see, that's a really good point, but there's no points. He's not been given any marks there because it doesn't actually add anything. It doesn't explain why the author has written it or anything like that. It's just stating a fact. Jekyll says he had been aware of two aspects to his character for a long time and felt he was living a double life. He tried to live as if he had only one nature, hiding his faults, excellent embedding of the quote there, because he was ashamed of them, but it was a strain. And they've put, shows understanding of the passage, okay? This introduces a different type of duality between appearance and reality. Clear relation to the question, bringing in a new idea. The appearance he presents to the outside world, a respectable doctor. See how he's used respectable there? Respectable, that's in the question. So that goes right back to here, respectable public life. I know as an examiner, he has read the question properly. Where do we get to? The respectable doctor is not the whole reality of who he is. Although he calls himself a double dealer, which is usually a term for a cheat or criminal, Jekyll is honest in saying that both aspects, good and bad, were equally part of him. Confident handling of complex sentence structure. So you can see how what they mean by that is you've got, although he calls himself a double dealer, then this is almost like an aside or like a kind of, oh, by the by, because you could have the full sentence. Although he calls himself a double dealer, Jekyll is honest in saying that both aspects were equally part of him. By adding in the comma here and the extra kind of explanation here and the kind of firm idea that he's talking about good and bad. So they kind of like, you've got your main sentence, then you kind of interject these little bits that add to or explain what you've just said. And that shows complex sentence structure. So nice long sentences. He now recognizes that these opposite urges made me what I was. Relevant quotation fluently embedded. I would say here, what I would do to improve the way that they've embedded this quote is he now recognizes that these opposite urges made, and then him, you can put in the square brackets. So you know how normally if you put something in brackets, you have the curved ones. If you use square brackets within a quote, and then you change the word inside, it tells us that you've changed something in that quote to make it grammatically correct. So if you wanted to say, he now recognizes that these opposite urges made, open square brackets, him, close square brackets, what, open square brackets, he, close square brackets, was. That makes more grammatical sense, and you can do that. But clearly, they've not been admonished for that. They've not been pulled up on that, so that's fine. But it is too late to put himself back together into a single whole personality. intelligent interpretation of Jekyll's position. He also sees that the division is present in everyone, though it is less obvious in most people. Jekyll's scientific work leads him to a solution to his own double-dealing life. He can make a potion which separates out the bad and gives it independent life. But all he is really doing is making an even deeper trench between the parts of his personality. What a brilliant embedded quote there. If you took away the speech marks, you would not know that that was a quote in there. It sounds like a full sentence that exists in its own right. But all he is really doing is making an even deeper trench between the parts of his personality. It just sounds like a sentence. And yet there's a quote in there. And that is the absolute, there you go, well-used quotation, the most brilliant way of embedding one when it just sounds and flows like that. He says that his scientific studies led wholly towards the mystic and the transcendental. Now here he hasn't embedded it very well. He's not really, he or she, have not embedded it here because he says that his scientific studies. So you could change that to make it embedded in a slightly better way by saying his scientific studies led wholly toward the mystic and transcendental as far as Jekyll was concerned. And that sounds much more embedded in there and probably would have got an extra mark for that. The science supernatural duality is presented through the contrasting characters Jekyll and Lanyon. Lanyon sees science as being the wholly rational, considering anything else to be balderdash. Appropriate use of quotation from outside the passage. So that means the passage that's been given in the exam, they've used a quote that's somewhere else in the book, and that's what you want because it shows that you've remembered those quotes. A word that dismisses Jekyll's view without giving it any dignity. Analysis of the effects of the word choice. I think that could be a little bit more, that could be explained and analysed a little bit more. For me, I would want that to be a little bit more juicier, put a bit more meat in there. Jekyll's choice of words, there we go. Now, here is a perfect example of where you would have an amazing opportunity to whack in some of that ambitious vocabulary. Jekyll's meticulous selection of words, mystical and transcendental, make his interests sound elevated and superior. Sounds so much more mature than Jekyll's choice of words, you know, meticulous selection. Just sounds so fab. The two areas of knowledge, the scientific and the mystical or supernatural, are another aspect of the double in the novel. Good. So he's bringing us back, although he didn't get a mark specifically for it, the flow of it is helping because it's bringing us back to what the question was. It's reminding us that he's remembered what the question's about. Jekyll approaches the mystical through science. When Jekyll and Hyde was written, people were starting to take an interest in psychology, which also tries to investigate the mind or soul through scientific ways. Writing about this duel of science mystery would make the novella seem topical to Stevenson's audience, relates theme to historical context. The idea of a split between the good spirit and the bad body seeking physical pleasures is very old. Jekyll says that the awareness of good and ill parts of the human lies at the root of all religions. Stevenson himself rejected Christianity and became an atheist. There may be some criticism in Jekyll's statement. Religions exploit the natural duality of human nature, making people feel bad about themselves. Very insightful there. Interpretation of the text related to the author's life and showing that the writer of this essay has a rounded reading and a bit of background knowledge on why the writer wrote what they did and how the public would have perceived that. The last line suggests there might be more than two aspects of human nature, but Jekyll doesn't know. But Jekyll doesn't know because his explorations did not pass beyond that point. He only experimented with two. This could mean a character could have more than one alter ego. But Jekyll's conclusion, which comes too late to help him, is that it is natural to be composed of conflicting parts. I really love the way there that he has actually used alliteration, not in a showy way, but it just sounds lovely. The writer of the essay has used their language so well there. So I'm just going to say that again. So, but Jekyll's conclusion, which comes too late to help him, is that it is natural to be composed of conflicting parts. I love it. Man is not truly one, but truly two. Trying to drive out the evil, to separate it in the personality of Hyde, is his downfall. The separation is not sustainable. Although Jekyll decides to give up Hyde and stops taking the potion, he cannot. Hyde breaks through because he is truly part of Jekyll. The other thing to highlight here is one of the things that they really want you to do, and is in the mark scheme, is for you to effectively use a variety of punctuation. So wherever you can, get in there an exclamation mark, a question mark, obviously your full stops and commas. Here they are using hyphens effectively, and also here using a colon. Okay, so if you are unsure of your colons and semicolons, look them up, because people are often too scared to use them. So if you do, you're going to stand out. Okay, I can identify that a mile off when I'm reading something, because I know how scared people are to use them, because I used to be. So that's a really rounded answer, really great, and that was a really solid grade 7. One of the things I would say is possibly missing, and the reason that they didn't get their 9, is that there isn't very much historical context in there. There's one little thing. He says one thing about society. He says one thing about Jekyll's upbringing and his nature, and his what happened when he kind of stood away from Christianity. But he hasn't got to the meat of the question, which is when we're looking at duality, what that meant for society, the fear that would have been, and the fact that people would not have wanted to read this. This would have been absolutely blasphemous, because everybody very, very devoutly believed in hell and heaven. They were the vast majority, almost everybody was Christian in England at that time. And so science threatened that. Science threatened the whole system of the church. And when you think, the church is at that point bringing money in, is trying to help the poor, and whether you've got a positive or negative idea of what they were doing at the time is kind of irrelevant. The fact remains that the church was going to lose money if they lost believers. They needed people going and donating and helping. And with the introduction of science, this made things, this really messed things up. And you can link that to Frankenstein. So Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, that book was banned in a lot of places, because how dare anybody even contemplate the idea that a human could create human life without, the usual conception, without, making a baby. Dr. Frankenstein has tried to create through science, creating a live creature, and that was seen as absolutely hellish, like the most blasphemous, insulting, disgusting approach to life, because they believed in heaven and hell. God was the only person who could create life. End of story. So trying to communicate those ideas a bit more, I think, is that would have helped with that idea of duality, and maybe got them up to a 9. Certainly they haven't got very much ambitious vocabulary in there. So they could have, like I said, choice of words, meticulous selection. There are a few places where there's some quite nice vocabulary, but most of it is within the quotes. So yeah, definitely get those in there. Now what I'm going to do next is sorry, it's getting a bit windy in here. Let me just shut my window. Hang on one second. It's like gale force winds going through here. It's all going on today. There we go. It's a bit better. Try not to knock over my drink. Right. So next I'm going to try now. When I've tried to get this up before, it's not let me actually see the actual answer. So I'm just going to try and get another answer up, but if not, I'm not too worried, because I'm going to show you the mark scheme. Okay, examiner's assessment. No, it's only give. Oh, here we go. Read another sample answer. I think that was candidate 1. No, that was that one. Let's try the next one. Right, and what did they get for this? Okay. So they're not giving any answers there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through this and we're going to see what you think. And then we're going to go to the mark scheme. It might be a generalized mark scheme because I don't know if I've actually got the mark scheme to this exact question, but you will see what I mean anyway. So read from chapter 9, Dr. Lanyon's narrative. He sprang to it to you who have derided your superiors, behold. At this point in the novel, Dr. Jekyll, transformed into Mr. Hyde, reveals his experiment. Starting with this moment in the novel, explore how Stevenson presents the relationship between Lanyon and Hyde in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Write about how Stevenson presents the interaction between Lanyon and Hyde in the extract and how he does it in the novel as a whole. Hyde has come to Lanyon's house to pick up the chemicals Lanyon has collected from Jekyll's laboratory. Okay, immediately, colloquial language. Pick up the chemicals. So that first sentence as an examiner would make me go, oh, that's a bit, it's not very formal. It's not very, it doesn't create a very good impression. Yeah. So he's come to Lanyon's house to pick up the chemicals. Even if he'd said collect, that would be better. Yeah. So that first sentence is the first impression. Make that, get in one of your ambitious vocabulary words in there in your first sentence if you can. Hyde has come to Lanyon's house to pick up the chemicals Lanyon has collected from Jekyll's laboratory. Jekyll doesn't know who Hyde is, and he immediately dislikes him. This is the usual thought of people seeing Hyde for the first time. So at the start of the passage, Lanyon doesn't like Hyde, and Hyde is desperate. He is frightened as he is grating his teeth and looking ghastly. Okay, so lots of information there, but the sentence structure is very similar. Can you hear that? Jekyll doesn't know who Hyde is and he immediately dislikes him. This is the usual thought of people seeing Hyde for the first time. So at the start of the passage, Lanyon doesn't like Hyde and Hyde is desperate. And that's in the first paragraph. So already the examiner is starting to make assumptions about what's going to come. Okay. It's not bad. It's not bad at all, but it's not, you can see the difference in how that is compared to the vocabulary and the sentence structure of the one we looked at just now. Also, using the word so at the start of a sentence, I wouldn't recommend. If you're going to do that, let's make this a longer sentence. Have a comma and a lowercase s. So you have, this is the usual thought of people seeing Hyde for the first time. So at the start of the passage, Lanyon doesn't like Hyde and sort of going to that way. However, that doesn't actually make sense in this moment because this sentence doesn't become part of that. It doesn't need a so at all. So at the start of the passage, Lanyon doesn't like Hyde and Hyde is desperate. He's frightened as he is grating his teeth and looking ghastly. Again, that thing of so at the start of the passage, having the so makes it colloquial again and a little bit too relaxed, a little bit too chatty. Lanyon tells Hyde to compose yourself, meaning to calm down. Okay, and then my answer to that would be, and? Why? Why has the author done that? What is the effect on the reader? Hyde changes a bit. Different word for that, slightly. Hyde changes a bit as soon as he has the chemicals. Lanyon is interested in the chemicals and describes those for a paragraph. So we don't really see how Hyde is behaving or seeming then. When he starts talking again, he's got cocky. So cocky is a great word, but again, very colloquial, very relaxed. So another word for cocky, he's become arrogant. Ostentatious is a great word. And starts to be rude to Lanyon. Rude, aggressive, violent, antagonistic. Yeah. He uses fancy language. So fancy, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to laugh. It's just, I love how relaxed it is. I actually quite enjoy reading it. He uses fancy language. So what's another word for fancy? He uses elaborate language. He uses extensive language. Yeah, he uses fancy language that is more like Jekyll's language. Interesting point. He seems to make it sound bad, whatever Lanyon chooses. If he doesn't watch Hyde's transformation, he's missing out on something amazing But if he does watch, it's because of the greed of curiosity. Greed is a bad thing, so he makes it sound like Lanyon can't control himself. There are some really insightful ideas there. And if that had been written in a more mature way, with a more mature vocabulary or more extensive vocabulary, I think those ideas would pop out a lot more and in a much better light. But at the moment, I'm finding it quite hard to get past the colloquial kind of chatty kind of impression or tone, I should say. Hyde warns Lanyon that what he sees next won't be good. Sorry, I've just thought of something in the previous paragraph. So I was thinking as I was reading, greed is a bad thing. So what he's written there is not wrong. Greed is considered a bad thing, but you can use that to comment on society. Greed was considered a bad thing in society because religion was so strong, or Christianity was so strong, and greed was associated with evil and not considered to be a good quality in a human being, or a redeeming quality in a human being. So he makes it sound like Lanyon can't control himself. So can you see how just by taking that greed is a bad thing and explaining that, analysing it, extending it, it just gives us a much more obvious way of, like, just much more analytical perspective. Hyde warns Lanyon that what he sees next won't be good. It will blast his sight and will be so astonishing that even Satan would find it hard to believe. But Lanyon doesn't listen to the warning because he doesn't really believe Hyde. Okay, so we've used the word believe twice in that paragraph. So my instinct here is to say, let's change one of those up. Even if you're not using ambitious vocabulary, try not to use repetitive vocabulary. So even Satan would find it hard to believe, but Lanyon doesn't believe this warning because he doesn't really believe Hyde. How can we rewrite that? He doesn't believe, he doesn't think Hyde is telling the truth. Even that would be better than repeating that word, especially when you can literally see it 2 lines apart. Hyde is pleased that Lanyon has decided to watch. He says, "It is well." So a way of embedding that better would be Hyde found it well that Lanyon had decided to watch. And then he would have an embedded quote rather than "he says." This is mean because it is going to be bad for Lanyon. Okay, again, vocabulary. In the rest of the story, Jekyll and Lanyon are enemies. They used to be friends, but they have fallen out and don't talk to each other anymore. Lanyon has told Utterson that he regards Jekyll as dead. In this part, Hyde is rude to Lanyon, even though Lanyon has gone to get the chemicals he wanted. Hyde is really Jekyll's alter ego, but Lanyon doesn't know that yet. Good. Hyde is continuing Jekyll's fight with Lanyon, but Lanyon doesn't know that because he doesn't know who Hyde is. So the passage carries, again, so, don't start with a so. So you could have therefore or consequently. The passage carries on the relationship between the two, or continues the relationship between the two men in the rest of the story, except that Lanyon doesn't know it. Again, they've kind of repeated that sentence again because they've said Lanyon doesn't know that. And then because Lanyon doesn't know it, they're kind of just, it's a little bit rambly there. So just be very clean and intentional with what you're saying. After this, Lanyon is horrified by seeing Hyde change to Jekyll and then hearing what Jekyll tells him, which he doesn't tell us. He says his life is shaken to its roots and he will die soon. Effectively, good, lovely first word in a sentence. That's what we want to see. Effectively, Jekyll and Hyde have killed him by letting him see the transformation and then explaining it all. So they have beaten Jekyll's enemy. That's an example where you could have a comma and a lowercase s, and that would be a much better choice. It's too hard a punishment just because Lanyon didn't agree with Jekyll over science. Because Hyde is so evil, though, he is willing to do this to prove that he, Jekyll, was right all along. You don't need the though. I would just have the, it's too hard punishment just because Lanyon didn't agree with Jekyll over science. Because Hyde is so evil, he is willing to do this to prove that he, Jekyll, was right all along. So let's see what answer. Let's start from 3. Was it a 3? Here we go. So this is giving us the actual examiner's comments. So sums up his first impressions, notes language and gives simple account of what it implies. Identifies effective change of focus, informally expressed, that's the colloquial. Language too informal. Identifies effective word choice, yes, but could extend it a bit more. Sums up state of relationship. Mistake in chronology. This happens after the events. So make sure you get the order of things right. Use of correct term, but repetitive. Accurate, but expressed in a confused way. Exactly as I said, it's kind of a bit rambly. Sums up this part of the essay. Relevant quotation embedded, yes. Attempt at personal interpretation. So let's see what the examiner gave. I wouldn't assess this as a 3. I would probably give it a 4, maybe. I might be being a bit generous there. I might give it a 4. What have they given? Yeah, they gave him a 4. Hey! So now read the comments below to understand why this grade was given. The examiner also provides tips on how the answer might be improved. Comment. The essay raises some points that are relevant to the question, but shows a fairly basic understanding of the relationship between Lanyon and Jekyll or Hyde. The student tends to tell the story and drift away from the question. Yeah. There is some use of quotation to support this point, to support points, but there needs to be more detailed examination of language and its effects. There is no reference to context or the theme of science that lies at the heart of the relationship between Lanyon and Jekyll. Absolutely. It's very surface level. It's almost just trying to sort of tell us the story and a little bit about the characters. It's not actually delving into what it's about. What was the writer Stevenson, what was he trying to do? What was his aim? Why was he writing it? What effect did it have on the reader? Is that the effect the writer wanted on the reader? That's the stuff that gets you, that's your analytical side. They're not just asking for what's the story and tell me about some of the characters, you know? So for a grade 6, they need to have a clear structure which answers the question through a logical sequence of points, write in a more formal style, make sure you understand the sequence of episodes in the plot, include some mention of science, which is an important link between Lanyon and Jekyll or Hyde. Basically, if you get any question, Jekyll and Hyde mention science, it's all about the science. And it's all about science versus religion. Look more closely at the effects of the language Stevenson uses with more quotations. Exactly as I just said, those effects need to get in there. And the reason they're saying things like that is because I'm going to show you the mark scheme. That's not mark, that's something else I was going to look at with you. AQA, literature, GCSE mark scheme. So I'm doing this so you can see how easy it is to find all this stuff. Go to the AQA website. Now let's say we're looking at Shakespeare. That's the mark scheme. Okay, now it's not going to be the same question, but it doesn't matter because you'll see what I mean. But no, this is going to be a very long thingamajiggy. Because this is going to maybe bear with me 1 second. Let's make that kind of bit. Right, so it gives some indications as to question by question what to add in with regard to content, because obviously there's a massive range of questions you can answer on different Shakespeare texts. We're going to look at the Shakespeare one at the moment, but the actual writing of it, like the general writing of it, has a certain thing about it. So looking at the Macbeth question, so kind of half forgetting what we've just done on Jekyll and Hyde, looking at Macbeth, it says, starting with this speech, explore how Shakespeare presents Macbeth's fears, right? How he presents them, his fears in the speech and in the play as a whole. Examiners are encouraged to reward any valid interpretations. Answers might, however, include some of the following. So this isn't, you have to put all of this in there. This is, you could write some of these things, but there might be other things that we've missed out, okay? So these things are giving you the levels of what you've got in there, okay? Then we're going to go to the actual mark scheme here, okay? So, right, let's go down. Let's go. No, do it this way. So I'm going up and down, must be making you feel sick. Right, assessment objectives. So to get an AO1, so basically remember, you don't get a GCSE mark or grade for each part of your paper. Okay, your GCSE mark, as in a grade 9, is made up of both papers, each of which have 2 parts. So it's only worth like a quarter, if you think of it like that. This one essay will be worth a quarter of your whole GCSE. So the way they do it is by giving marks, and by giving the marks, as a way of giving marks, they tell you to look at the level. So you have a level, which gives you a mark, which then contributes to your GCSE grade. So although we're saying things and using language when you're looking online of how to get a grade 9 answer, there isn't really any such thing as a grade 9 answer, only what's a top mark answer that will contribute to getting a grade 9 in your GCSE. So I just want to be clear about that if this looks a bit confusing. So your paper is split into 2 ways. It's marked in 2 ways: content and structure, and technical accuracy. So I did talk about this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's just so important. So if you've got your content, that's what you're putting in there. Are you answering the question? Are you adding historical context, social context? Why did the author write what they did? What was their intention, and what influenced them to write it? And what is the effect it has on the reader? That is all your content. And structure is if you do your plan like I showed you, you've got your structure. They don't like it if you put all your ideas and social context, everything all at the end. They want you to make your point, show your evidence, and then give your whole historical social context for that bit, then do the next bit, then do the next bit, and then pull it all together at the end with your final conclusion and overall feeling, and how you feel about how successful the author was in doing what the question has asked about. So this bit is about, let's have a look here. Right. So how to apply the mark scheme. The mark scheme is constructed using 6 levels of attainment that span the whole range of ability at GCSE. The descriptors of attainment reference the assessment objectives, so what you're examined on for that particular question. Examiners are required to use the mark scheme to consider the whole response and decide upon the most appropriate level. The mark scheme provides 2 descriptors: a description of typical features of a response in each level, and a description of the kinds of skills candidates in that level will be proficient in. This is in order to support examiners in making their judgment of the extent to which the qualities and skills being demonstrated merit a particular level of attainment. As each response being marked is a response to a particular task, examiners are assessing the extent to which the candidate has responded to the task, and also the level of skill that the candidate has demonstrated. Each level has 4 or 5 marks available and 4 or 5 skills descriptors. Fair application of the mark scheme to all candidates is driven by the descriptors in the mark scheme, and therefore examiners are required to make a judgment about the extent to which a candidate achieves every descriptor in that particular level in order to warrant a mark at the top of that level. If a candidate achieves everything in a level, they should be awarded the mark at the top of that level. Since answers will rarely match a descriptor in all respects, examiners must allow good performance in some aspects to compensate for shortcomings in other respects. Consequently, the level is determined by the best fit rather than requiring every element of the descriptor to be matched. Examiners should aim to use the full range of levels and marks, taking into account the standard that can reasonably be expected of candidates after 1 or 2 years of study on the GCSE course and in the time available in the examination. If a candidate does not address a particular defining feature of a task, examiners are required to make a judgment about the extent to which other skills can place the response in a particular level and where the response should be placed. Now, this is from June 2022. This has slightly changed. It does what I've been taught is that you do need to achieve everything in one level to some extent to get into the next level. Step 1, determine a level. Start at the lowest level of the mark scheme and use it as a ladder. This is it. Use it as a ladder to see whether the answer meets the descriptor for that level. The descriptor for the level indicates the different qualities that might be seen in the student's answer for that level. If it meets the lowest level, then go to the next one and decide if it meets this level, and so on, until you have a match between the level descriptor and the answer. With practice and familiarity, you will find for better answers, you'll be able to quickly skip through the lower levels of the mark scheme. When assigning a level, you should look at the overall quality of the answer and not look to pick holes in small and specific parts of the answer where the student has not performed quite as well as the rest. If the answer covers different aspects of different levels of the mark scheme, you should use a best fit approach for defining the level and then use the variability of the response to help decide the mark within the level. For example, if the response is predominantly level 3 with a small amount of level 4 material, it would be placed in level 3 but be awarded a mark near the top of that level because of the level 4 content. Okay, so does that make sense? If you've got some things of the above level, but you've got a lot more of the bottom level, then obviously you're at the top, either the top of the bottom level or the bottom of the top level. So once you've determined which band you're in, which level, then we're going to look at where within that band you sit, which is your mark. Once you've assigned a level, you need to decide on the mark. The descriptors on how to allocate marks can help with this. The exemplar materials used during standardization will also help. There will be an answer in the standardizing materials which will correspond with each level of the mark scheme. This answer will have been awarded a mark by the lead examiner. You can compare the student's answer with the example to determine if it is on the same standard, better or worse than the example. You can then use this to allocate a mark for the answer based on the lead examiner's mark on the example. You may well need to read back through the answer as you apply the mark scheme to clarify points and assure yourself that the level and mark are appropriate. So this is what the examiner has to do. Indicative content in the mark scheme is provided as a guide for examiners. It is not intended to be exhaustive. That means it's not that or nothing. And you must credit other valid points. Students do not have to cover all of the points mentioned in the indicative content to reach the highest level of the mark scheme. So if you're in a certain, for example, if you do ambitious vocabulary and you misspell one of your words, the fact that you've used ambitious vocabulary and you've used it elsewhere and spelt it correctly, they're going to let you off that one. You know, you don't have to be absolutely perfect to get top marks. Okay, I'm not going to read all of that because it's getting very boring. Okay, I'm just going straight to the mark schemes. That's basically the thing we need. So these are our assessment objectives. So level AO4, assessment objective, that's what the AO stands for. Use a range of vocabulary and sentence structures for clarity, purpose, and effect with accurate spelling and punctuation. Show understanding of the relationships between texts and the contexts in which they were written. Analyze the language, form, and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects using relevant subject terminology where appropriate. And read, understand, and respond to text. Students should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response. So if you forget to do it, wherever you are in the very, very last paragraph, say how it has affected you or how successful you think the author was in doing what they've done. So if we're looking at that Jekyll and Hyde essay and about the theme of duality, say how successful you think Stevenson was in presenting duality, or the double, as it said, you know, refer back to actually how it's termed in the question. So you can go back and say, in my opinion, or personally, as a reader myself, I found that Stevenson's approach to presenting the double was very successful. I felt this was this dual quality represented in the characters of Jekyll and Hyde coming from one person were very reflective of the time, looking at religion versus science, yada, 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 etc., etc., and made for an enjoyable, entertaining and thrilling read. That's a really lovely way to finish off any of your essays, giving your personal opinion. So here we go. Assessment of AO4. So then we decide which mark is in here. So we decide on the level. So these are the things that you can, allocate and say, oh, we've identified that, we've identified that, we've identified that. Now we're going to look at, so this is section A and B. Okay, so threshold performance, this means you've just done it. And this is on one particular question, but we're not going to go into that one. So this is our Shakespeare questions. This we're going to look at. So we start at the bottom. Remember what they said? Use it like a ladder. We're going to start at the bottom. So for no marks, nothing worthy of credit or nothing written. Okay. Level 1, simple comment on explicit ideas. Explicit meaning really obvious ideas, contextual factors, awareness of writer making choices, possible reference to subject terminology. So maybe one or two things about the words in it or a quote or something. Simple comments relevant to task and text, reference to relevant details. At the top of the level, a candidate's response is likely to be narrative and or descriptive in approach. So similar to the second one that we looked at, it was a lot of just sort of really saying what was going on and what the characters were like rather than any in-depth analysis. It may include awareness of the task and provide appropriate reference to text. There will be simple identification of methods with possible reference to subject terminology. Simple comments, responses to context, usually explicit. Okay, I'm going to skip through a little bit to the level 4, which was what I awarded, and so did the other examiner. Clear understanding of ideas, perspective, contextual factors shown by specific links between context, text, and task. Yes, so they were referring back to the question, they were talking about the text, and they did do some explanations of context, and they did understand it really well. It's just that they didn't deliver it in a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Advanced. They didn't deliver it in a very advanced way. It was quite chatty, colloquial, informal. Clear explanation of writers' methods with appropriate use of relevant subject terminology, understanding of effects of writers' methods to create meanings. Now, I would say that here is where they fell down a little bit. But they did do it to some extent. So I'm going to sort of like say, yeah, that's a lesser one, but it's still there. Clear explained response to task and whole text. Yeah, they did that. Effective use of references, that means quotes or saying in this scene, to support explanation. So a candidate's response is likely to be clear, sustained, and consistent. It takes a focused response to the full task, which demonstrates clear understanding. It uses a range of references effectively to illustrate and justify explanation. There will be clear explanation of the effects of a range of writers' methods supported by appropriate use of subject terminology. Clear understanding of ideas, perspectives, and contextual factors. I don't think they would be at the top of this level, to be honest, because, and I think you'll probably agree, having read that, he wasn't clear, he or she, they weren't clear, explained responses. They were there and they were kind of clear, but they were very basic. They did write about writers' methods, but they didn't really give a clear explanation. They just said it. So they have achieved all of these things, but I do think we're probably looking at the lower end. I think I'd probably be giving this like a 16. A candidate with level 3, this is the bottom level, a candidate will have level 3 and be starting to demonstrate elements of understanding and or explanation of the writer's methods and or context. Yes, I would agree with that. So we're basically looking at this, which is some explained response, explained or relevant comments, identification of effects as opposed to clear understanding of ideas. So yeah, definitely a level 3, but I think, yeah, we're probably looking at a 16. I would probably award that. And then as we go up, we've got thoughtful consideration. So this is where we start looking at the first example that we use. And that one was really clear, really thoughtful, some really nice ideas in there. So thoughtful consideration of ideas, perspectives. So by perspectives, they're saying, why did the writer, I keep saying this, why did the writer write what they did? Where were they coming from? What was their influence? So in A Christmas Carol, Scrooge is mean, not just because he is, but because he was abandoned by his father and there's no mention of his mother. His sister dies and his her fiance leaves him because she thinks he's too interested in money. Um, excuse me. So it shows that there's a reason for him being where he is. There's a reason for him, you know, his perspective on life. And then you take it another step further and say, okay, well, why is Dickens doing that? Why is Dickens presenting this villain as having this background that almost, maybe not justifies, but certainly explains his callous and cold behavior? And the reason Dickens is doing that is because the people he was writing for and writing this for were the upper classes, the employers, the ones that had all the money and all the power. But if he painted him as a complete villain, it would be really unrealistic for him to have a transformation and become, you know, the better person that he does become. And second of all, it would mean that he sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought because I can hear downstairs shouting. Sorry. Yeah, so first of all, we're talking about Scrooge and how Dickens would want him to come across as redeemable. And second of all, he doesn't want to offend the people that he's trying to influence. He needs to hold a mirror up to them and say, look, you know, your ignorance and your greed, whether you mean it to be or not, is actually causing poverty in a massive amount of the society, a massive number of people. But he has to be gentle with it. So he gives Scrooge a hard life to justify why he's behaving the way he is, as a means of kind of placating or soothing, gently introducing this idea that actually what they're doing is a bit mean. So that would be a case of a perspective. You're looking at the writer's perspective, and contextual factors, obviously looking at the history, what was going on in history at the time, what's the development in technology, in science, what's happening with religion, is there a war going on, you know, whereabouts is society, what's going on, what is happening to people. So when you're looking at things like that, that's where we're getting up into the level 6, which is the top band. So if you notice that this is a level 6, not a level 9, it's because each question is based on up to 6 levels. And then that awards the level, then awards the marks, gives you what mark to put it in. And then the mark is that is roughly a quarter of what goes towards your exam, your final mark. Actually, do you know what? It's not exactly a quarter because you'll have your speaking and listening as well for language. So yeah, but it gives you an idea anyway. So to get a top mark, you need to have critical, exploratory, conceptualized, I can never say that, response to task and whole text, judicious use of precise references to support interpretations. So you're not just saying Jekyll is evil, I am evil. That's the quote. Not that that is a quote, don't use that. But it's not just that. It's saying, I believe Jekyll is perceived as being evil when he's in the guise of Hyde, because that is what society has dictated through the use of religion as being respectable. So you've put that quote in and you've used it to be an absolute reference to what you're saying. Analysis of writers' methods with subject terminology used judiciously. Exploration of effects of writers' methods to create meanings. So why has the writer written it? What's the meaning of it? Why have they bothered to say it? And what's the effect that that therefore has on the reader? And why does the author want the reader to feel that way? In A Christmas Carol, the author wants the reader to feel that way about sorry, I forgot what book I did. Did I say In Spectacles or A Christmas Carol? Let's start that one again. In A Christmas Carol, the author Dickens wants the reader to feel that way so that they change their ways and start to be better towards the poor so that it can have a better life for the whole of society. And consequently, because of authors like Dickens, loads of schools ended up springing up all over the place. Employers started opening libraries for their employees and things like that so they could better themselves, because that was the only way that they could. And nobody was educated, nobody could read or write unless they had the money to pay. So that was, huge. And obviously that has a big influence on the characters. Bob Cratchit can't earn more money because he is not educated. There's nothing he can do. All he can do is work in the jobs that he gets, but that job has a set wage which is not high enough to pay for his family. So it's really tough. And that's one of the things that's really important. That's one of the things Dickens really wanted people to know. And it was very similar with regard to an Inspector Calls, in that J.B. Priestley wanted to convert people to being anti-war and communist because he believed everyone should be of one body, as the inspector says. In Lord of the Flies, the author wants the audience, reader, to see the barbaric behavior between these innocent young boys and the violence of human nature that is innate within us, similar to kind of Hyde in Jekyll and Hyde, showing that this innate violence and, if you like, evil is within all of us. And it comes from, we have to choose better. We've been civilized, we've been socialized, and we need to behave accordingly in order to keep each other safe. And the reason that the author of Lord of the Flies wanted us to feel that way is because he wanted to make sure that we didn't have another war, that we weren't all trying to be, dog eat dog and survival of the fittest, that actually we need to help each other. Piggy represents the whole part of society that is discarded because they're seen as either physically disabled, which could arguably be represented by his vision impairment, by people who are seen as less than because they are not what now, it's so weird how it works now, social media would deem as visually acceptable, because Piggy's overweight. It's taken years for anyone to start to highlight body shaming and things like that. That didn't exist years ago. People would call each other fat, or they would say, I was bullied for being fat, and that was only 20 years ago. Whereas now it still happens, but it is happening a lot less because we're a lot more aware of it. So that was one of the intentions of the writer, wanting to teach us that this is not okay. How we treat each other is not okay. And by doing it through the eyes of children, that is showing a kind of, it heightens the corruption of the innocence of the human spirit when we become violent and we allow those violent urges to take over. And so if you can put all that kind of stuff in there, wow, your essays are just going to be like straight to a level 9, because they are real interpretations of the text, of why the writer's writing them. And then all you're doing is using the references and using the examples to prove that point. Your essay should not be, here are all the quotes, and then I'm writing little bits around it. It should be, I'm writing you this idea that I think this book is about, that I think it's presenting, the way that I read it, the way I see it, the way it's affected me, the way it affects other people, what it was doing about society. And I can prove it because there's this quote, and there's this quote, and there's this quote here, and there's this, and then he says this, and then this event happens. That's kind of the difference. And that's what makes you look like an English critic rather than an English student writing an essay in the way that your tutors have told you to. So you can see the difference in getting up to those level 6s. And everywhere in between is just an extension of. Now, in the this is a 2022 mark scheme, but it does openly refer to the term ambitious vocabulary in the 2024 ones. So I am going to just highlight that for you again, and remind you to go to your Google link, or just go to Google and just type in ambitious vocabulary, and that should really help you just up those marks in your essay. So tomorrow I'm going to look at some model answers for language, because that's graded slightly differently. And I look forward to, oh, sorry, tomorrow, what am I talking about? No, it's the weekend. I will see you on Monday. Have a lovely weekend, and I look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Bye.